Hi, I'm Laurie from Laurie's Country Cottage. I've always wanted to say that. I'm actually one of 3 Lauries that works here in the shop, and I'm here today to show you how to use the Stripology XL ruler to make the Amalie quilt. So we're going to start today by looking at the Stripology XL. It's a beautiful acrylic ruler made by Creative Grids, designed by a lady by the name of Gudrun Erla. I probably said that completely wrong. She's from Iceland, so I don't think she expects us to pronounce her name. It is a slotted ruler with 1/2 inch increments, 22 inches wide, so probably one of the largest ones on the market. You can cut up to 22 inches because you can use this side as well. This ruler was the only ruler that I used for this entire project. So I used it to make strips, rectangles, squares, triangles, and to square up the blocks. It's a really multi-purpose tool. A lot of people who have it probably underutilize it. When I first got it, I used it only to cut binding strips. I didn't know anything else. And then I saw a video with the lady who made the ruler. So versatile and wonderful, and really a great tool to have in your arsenal. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do to get ready to make this quilt is to start by making the strips. So on this quilt, they're in turquoise. Mine are in white because I'm going with a different color palette for this particular version. Before I can lay my ruler out, I want to make sure that my fabric is prepared properly. If I don't do this right, I'm going to end up with fabric that has a bend in it. And you just know that's going to throw all your accuracy off, right? So what I did to prepare the fabric is I folded it in half on the bolt fold. Generally, the bolt fold is your good starting point, but it doesn't always work that way. We've all gotten fabric with really wonky bolt folds in them. If that happens, just iron your fabric and create a new fold at the halfway point. I'm going to then fold my selvage towards me. Doesn't matter whether it's towards you or away from you, that's just what I do. And I ran the selvage edge parallel to my bolt edge. I wanted to make sure and do that because it's generally going to be about even and is generally going to give me an even piece. Now I have to check and make sure that it's even. So I'm going to start by laying my ruler out. I'm going to use the black lines on here because my fabric is light. Every second line is white, the next one is black, and it alternates so you can use it with different kinds of fabric. So I'm going to lay that out, and you can see here that this line runs right along the bottom of the bolt fold, and this line is running right along the top there. If it's not quite even, you can scooch it a little bit and double check it again and just make sure. Nope, I overcompensated. Try that again. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So I've given myself a little bit of room here. I'm going to give it a tiny bit more because of the fabric scooching has created an uneven line there. And I'm going to start off by cutting the raw edge off. And to do that, I'm going to take my cutter, my rotary cutter, which in this case is 45, but you can also use a 60. Don't use anything less. This is quite a thick ruler, and you combine that to the thickness of the fabric, and a smaller cutter just won't do the trick. So I'm going to just notch that in like that. Don't go straight in because you might dull your blade. Just kind of lay it sort of sideways and just let it kind of slide in there like that. Run it along. You'll want to hold it with one of your fingers. It doesn't matter if you're left-handed or right-handed. You can do the same thing on the other side. Now you'll notice here that at the bottom I've got these green arrows. These are a product that we also carry here in the store. The package comes with 3 different colors. They're again made by G-Easy Designs. And all they do is they just allow you to kind of know where you're going to cut. There are hints on the bottom of the ruler, the stars and the squares. I'm a color code gal, so I use the arrows. I want to cut 2-inch strips, so I'm just going to lay my fingers there, notch my ruler, and notch my ruler. Now this is a Creative Grids ruler, which means that the bottom of it is beveled. That means it's not going to move around and slip and slide on you. That, combined with the fact that you're not constantly picking up your ruler and moving it and moving it and moving it, means that you're going to have really even cuts every time. So when we take our little extra piece away, we end up with 2-inch strips that are exactly even and exactly straight and exactly the same. It's really going to increase your accuracy of cutting. Our next step is to take these strips and subcut them into 14-inch by 2-inch strips, rectangles. So to do that, I'm going to lay out all 3 of these strips that I already pre-cut for you, and I'm going to lay them out the same. I want to lay them out so that my salvage edge is over here. I just want to lay them a little farther along the table. I'm going to use the lines on my cutting mat to make sure that everything is nice and straight. And I'm going to have my fold to the right. And I'm going to do that with every single one of these. Scooch that over. And a third one on the stack. You could do 4 if you had them. I just cut 3 strips, so we're just going to do 3. Okay. Now, on my ruler, I'm going to cut a 14-inch strip right there. So I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to put my black line down on the bottom strip. Lay that out. Oh wow, that was pretty even. I'm pretty pumped by that. It doesn't normally work out so well. This one here just needs a little scooching. There we go. Now the lines continue over past the cutting edge, which is very helpful. Even that one up. Okay, so I'm going to cut off my salvage edge. Okay, and then I'm going to go to 14. I now have my 6 14-inch strips ready to go. And I'm going to do the same thing with these strips. I'm just going to subcut these into 14 inches. That's the reason why the fold is always on the same end. That allows you to use that piece. And this is where you're going to find out whether your fabric's bowed or not. Because when you unfold it, if you have a piece of fabric that kind of goes like this, you didn't prepare your fabric properly. So I'm going to find my black line right there. Lay that out, make sure that's nice and even and straight. Trim up my end. The next thing we need to do is take our squares and turn them into triangles. Now, you could cut this way, but you'll notice that the XL is just a little bit short for that. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to just use the edge of the XL as it was a regular straight ruler. And since we're just cutting corner to corner, oops, tried to cut through the acrylic, it's a pretty straightforward cut. So we've cut out all of our triangles and we've cut out our white strips. The next thing to do is join them together. And we're going to join them together roughly like this. You want to mix up your colors, make sure you're not joining 2 of the same color together. But the process can be a little bit tricky. The trick here is the fact that your triangles are cut on the bias. And if you don't treat these right, you're going to end up with a really wonky quilt because they get stretched out really easily. Here's a little trick for you. I want to start with centering my white pieces. And so I'm going to just finger press that, okay? That's going to mark my center. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my triangle. Okay, just do a little finger press there. So I can see my center there. Hopefully I can still see it in a second. And I'm going to lay my strip right sides together on top. And you can see, there we go, there it is. There's my center. And I'm going to pin that because I don't want these to move around. And when I'm sewing these together, I tend to do a lot of strip piecing, and so I want them all kind of together and laid out and ready to just use the next piece. When I sew this on my machine, I want to make sure that my grain cut fabric is on the top and my bias cut fabric is on the bottom. The feed dogs will move your bias cut fabric along smoothly and easily and keep everything fairly even. You're less likely to end up with stretching. When you're done sewing them together, you're going to press them out, and you always want to press to the color in this case. So if you're doing the black and white Amalie quilt, you're pressing towards the black or the white fabric. And we just join the second piece together, doing this exact same thing, centering the fabric on there. Make sure when you center it, you're not necessarily centering it on here. Make sure you're centering your points. Okay? You sew that together and you press it out like that, and you have your first square. Once we've sewn our nested seams together, and by the way, you can see that I moved mine up, not down. Again, that's fine. I just have to do the same thing every time. So I've sewn my seam, and I'm going to press this, but when I press it, I'm going to show you a little trick. I want it to lie as flat as possible, and the only way that's going to happen is if I spin my seams. So if you look at the back of this, you're going to see that in the center here, I've created a tiny little baby forepatch, right? And that happens by pressing like this. We press one seam this way, and we press one seam this way. So they're going in opposition to each other. When you do that, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to fold my seam open, but I don't want to leave it open. I'm going to pop that one to this side, and I'm going to pop this one to this side. Okay, so I end up with the purple on top over here, and I would end up with the blue on top over here. And that's going to leave me that little square flat piece in the middle, and it's going to mean that I'm not going to have such bulky seams in the center of my block. So our final step to do before we put the whole quilt together is to square up our blocks. If you look here, you see that this is not a square anymore. This is a rectangle, and it has to be a square. We're looking for an 8.5-inch square to be made out of this. And the easiest way to do that is to use our Stripology XL ruler. Surprise! So you can square anything up to a 12.5-inch block using this particular ruler. In this case, I'm going to use this space right here where my two sets of 45-degree angle white dotted lines are intersecting. That's the center of my block. And we can see here, remember this was all cut using the Stripology XL. I've got a perfect square here. No trim needed if I'm going for 10 inches. But I'm going to trim up my sewn block. So I'm going to line it up with my white lines in the center and lined up along each of my seams. Now, if this doesn't match up perfectly, don't worry too much about it. The key is really these parts right here. You really want your corners to be perfect, because if they're not, you're going to find that it doesn't work very well. And then I'm going to use these pink arrows and trim. I've got quite a large piece of scrap fabric left over, easy enough to use for, again, that scrap quilt that I keep talking about and never doing anything about. And laying that out there. corners are perfect. There we go. And that will be a much smaller piece of fabric. And there's your perfect square. The entire thing built only with a Stripology XL ruler. So these are 2 blocks made from the exact same pieces of fabric. And you'll notice that each block has got 2 small triangles and 2 large triangles. Why is this important? Well, when you're putting your quilt block together, you never want to put 2 big ones or 2 little ones side by side. Instead, what you want to do is you want to turn it so that you've got 1 small triangle, 1 large triangle. And when you do this, this will create the pinwheel pattern that you see in the quilt that I've made. However, do be careful, please, do be careful to check that your pinwheels are all aligned before you get the quilt quilted. Because if you take a look at the quilt that I made, you will see there is 1 strip that is out of alignment. It got turned upside down. And I didn't discover it till it was too late. We all make mistakes. So in a little break there, Laurie was curious about how these seams are nested because they're pressed the same direction. So that shouldn't work. So here's how this works. If we were sewing them like this, they would not nest. You can see that that is not going to work. But what I'm doing is I'm pulling the top one down so that I have a white strip here and a second white strip to the right of it. And that's what allows us to nest our seams. So here you can see 4 completed blocks, and you'll notice that what they do is they create this lovely pinwheel pattern with the white fabric. However, I want to show you what happens when you don't match your patterns up properly. Notice we have a small triangle and a large triangle. If you start doing this, matching small triangle and small triangle, you lose your pinwheel. The other thing I wanted to show you is what happens when you don't put your fabrics the same way every time. So if you'll recall, I showed you how to nest your seams when you were putting the 2 cut triangles together and how to nest these seams. This block was done with the nesting done at the bottom, and the other 3 were done with the nesting done at the top. And you'll notice that even though I'm matching a large one and a small one, I don't have my pinwheel. So you do have to make absolutely certain that you are always nesting your seams in the same way every time. Inside the Stripology XL ruler, I just wanted to show you this. The folder that comes with it has an explanation of lots of different ways that you can use the ruler, including how to make triangles and so on. But I think one of the most interesting things is that even though this is in 1/2-inch increments, you can use it to make 1/4-inch cuts. And there's a little explanation here of how to move the ruler. What you would do is you would make 1 cut, and then you would shift the ruler over. And there's these lines on the side of the ruler, excuse me, that are in 1/4 inches. So you would move this over to the edge of your fabric and make a different cut, and then you end up with 2 pieces that have 1/4-inch cuts in them. Thanks for joining us here at Laurie's Country Cottage and learning about the Stripology XL ruler and the many different ways that you can use it. We hope that you enjoy this and that you make yourself something beautiful with the Stripology XL, maybe our Amalie quilt.